I was a college sophomore the first time I heard about privilege, and it didn't go so well. I was humiliated. I was in a class where a faculty member was talking about Black urban families, and she described characteristics like headed by women, high unemployment rate, underemployment rates, high rates of teenage pregnancy. I don't remember all the characteristics today. What I remember was feeling strangely familiar and confused. How could she be describing the characteristics of Black urban families and me feeling like they applied to my family? I didn't quite know how to ask a question. I was a first-generation college student, and I was really nervous, but I raised my hand and took a breath, and I said to her, are there some things that are about urban and not Black? Because I'm trying to figure out how it is that what you're describing fits my white family. She eyeballed me for a minute, and she pointed at me and said, "Don't you ever compare yourself to a Black family. It doesn't matter how poor you are or how underemployed you are. You have privilege because you're white." Well, I was horrified. I could feel my face flush, and I looked down at my book just staring straight ahead. Someplace between, can I crawl under the desk here, or do I just hit her and leave? You want to talk about poor? So I breathed, and I sat there for a moment, and I was really confused. I had no idea what that was about. I had no idea that day of what Peggy McIntosh calls the invisible package of unearned benefits, white privilege, the invisible package of unearned benefits. Now, I was an emancipated minor at 15. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have dental insurance. If I had to go to the dentist, I had to work at a $25 a month gig in order to get a tooth fixed. In fact, at that point in my life, I didn't have a home address or a home, and I was worried when school ended and I had to clean out my dorm room what I would do with my things, because colleges didn't let you keep your stuff there all summer. They rented those rooms out. And she said I was privileged. I mean, I couldn't get my hands around any of that at that moment in time. But come back to the invisible, unearned package of benefits. At some level, the professor was right. I couldn't get my hands around it at that point. I wouldn't live into that for a long time. And this is the place where the conversation for people who look like me and with people who look like me can get a little difficult. We have to be able to breathe through our defensiveness about the fact that that's not talking about me, that's not talking about me. But I promise you, if we can do this and unpack that privilege, we can make more space for a more humane and just world. So if skin privilege is unearned, it often manifests itself in unconscious ways. Let me give you a couple examples. My daughter in junior high was going to go out for the dance team, so I had to go to the parents' orientation. And I walked into the back room, and there was this huge table of stuff that she was going to have to purchase if she made the dance team. They had matching hair pieces, matching makeup for real with all the same palette, and matching flesh-colored hose. When the coach held up the flesh-colored hose, what I became aware of was it only matched the flesh of about a third of the girls in the room. So what about that makeup palette, and what about those hair pieces? How could I ever get a hair piece in this? Before the Ebony card series came out in many of the stores, when a Black or brown child went looking for a Mother's Day card, all they could find was one with a picture like me. I have a 3-year-old mixed-race granddaughter. In my own home, she asked her mother to blow dry her hair straight so she could see how long it was. She walked out of the bathroom and looked at us. She shook her head like this. And said, "Look, Nana, I look like a princess." What messages had she absorbed as a 3-year-old that convinced her if her hair was long and blowing in the wind, it was princess hair, but her beautiful, curly, natural hair didn't count as princess hair, right? You can look at the data for yourselves that's all around us about how those unconscious messages feed into media, feed into the targeting of people of color. And so why is this conversation important? Why is it important to me? At the end of the day, this is a conversation about humanity. This is a conversation about love. Every day, my whiteness is reaffirmed in multiple ways, at the expense of my friends and family of color who are rendered more invisible. Every single day, there are things that point out to my grandchildren that they don't fit whatever we decided norm was, right? This is a conversation that's important to me because I believe if we will unpack our privilege, we can use it to change the world, not in the huge way I dreamed of in my 20s, but in the day-by-day acts. I've got to be willing to listen and hear and see and act on stories that sometimes feel like they're blaming me, sometimes do blame me, sometimes make me uncomfortable. But do you know how many of those stories my colleagues of color have heard? Well, people in the room looked right at them, like they were about them, right? So that's why it's important to me. I think about a month ago, a 15-year-old black girl was riding her bike. She hit a car. Some of you may have heard about this. Nobody was hurt. She got up. She waited for the police to come. In a situation that escalated, that my chief would say wasn't handled well, she was handcuffed because she didn't want to go to the hospital, put in the back of a car, and then pepper sprayed through the window. How many of us sitting here today have to worry that when our 15-year-old daughter goes out for a bike ride, she's going to end up in the back of a car, handcuffed and pepper sprayed, and I might add, terrified? So how do we make this different? How do we use our privilege? Martin Luther King said, "Until you are all you can be, I will never be all I can be." I am certain that those of you sitting in the audience today that have listened to these talks and resonated, believe until you, whoever your you is, are all you can be, I will never be all I can be. In 1967, there was a huge uprising in Detroit. My grandma worked downtown and she couldn't go to work for the week because of the riots that were going on. When she could go back in next week, she took me. There were buildings that were burned. There were all kinds of, there was a man sleeping in the window of a building. And I said to her, look, Ma, look at that guy sleeping in the window. My grandma pulled me over and she said, pulled the car over and she said to me, look, you're more fortunate. You may be better than, you may be more fortunate. You have food to eat, a place to sleep, and people who care about you. That makes you more fortunate, not better than. I had no idea what she was saying to me as a 9-year-old. And I kind of looked at her and thought, okay. What I understand she was saying to me is, I might be more privileged, but that doesn't make me better than. Today, when we hear about the Black Lives Matter movement, it polarizes people. People want to yell, White Lives Matter. I was on campus at a Black Lives Matter die-in when students started yelling down the hall, White Lives Matter. Let me say this, the Black Lives Matter movement wasn't anti-white. It was born out of the desperation and pain of too many lost boys and men, of too much invisibility, too much inequity. Black Lives Matter isn't saying white lives don't, it's saying black lives don't matter enough. Let's face it, my son, when he gets in the car and goes out of the house, I don't have to worry all the time, except like we all do about driving. When my daughter goes shopping in the store, no clerk is going to follow her around. And people really, mostly, I don't have to worry that they're going to be afraid of me because of how I look. But my son-in-law, Every time he goes out to the car, every time he steps out of the door, I worry. I know his mama worries. I know now my wife worries. My daughter worries. I have been with him in the last decade on numerous occasions that he has been targeted for nothing more than being black. We were in our house one day. They were living with me. We jumped in the car, forgot our wallets. He got out to go back in the house and get his wallet, ran back and got in the car, and as we went to pull out, we realized there was a police car blocking the driveway. And the police was coming out to Gentry's side of the car, and they asked him for his, first they said, "What are you doing in the house?" And he said, "I live here." And then the officer asked for his driver's license. And at that point, I leaned up and said, "Is there a problem? This is my house and this is my son-in-law." And he got back in his car and drove away. And I could take the rest of the time today to give you those kinds of examples. But here's what's important to me. I have a 7, 5, 3, and 1.5-year-old grandchildren that he's the daddy. I have a niece and a nephew in this audience today. That kind of scrutiny and that kind of risk is something they face every day of their lives. And I know as sure as I stand here, we can make that different. We can change the world if we can understand our privilege, unpack that, and engage across communities. Because if we want a more humane and just world, and I got to tell you, right now we're in pretty tough shape around that stuff. We can't throw up our arms and walk away. It's not going to benefit our children or any of the children who come after our children. It's not going to benefit our aunts and uncles and our parents. It's on us. It's time. That's right. It's time. And it's on us to understand that daily process of unpacking that invisible, unearned package of privileges in service of a more just and humane world. It's time.